So recently I went to Japan, immersing myself in the culture and experiencing everything that I could. And while I was there, I saw a lot of ads and commercials almost everywhere that I looked. And while watching these, I noticed that Japan had a certain style or feeling in filmmaking that I couldn't figure out, or what it might have been called. I came across a philosophy that was rooted into Japanese culture that made a bit of sense to where this style of filmmaking might have been stemmed from. That philosophy is Ma. So what is Ma? Ma is a concept that describes the space between things. It is the pause, the emptiness, and the breath that gives shapes to everything around it. Now, Ma is kind of not just blank space, it's more of intentional space. And in filmmaking, we often think of power that comes from visuals, the movement, the sound design, but Ma kind of teaches us that, the real impact that lives in the empty spaces that we keep and that we choose. You can think of it as being minimal and trying to tap into more of the emotional side of it. Now, there was one creator that I feel that kind of has mastered this, and his name is Dedtoto. Hopefully I'm saying that right. I have no idea if I am, but either way, this guy's awesome. He's a Japanese creator and director that uses negative space in his videos as a supporting element. Even in frames that kind of feel and seem busy, in my opinion, he still uses this as a concept in his own way to kind of have and show those negative spaces, either way being used or created. I have no idea if he even really thinks about this concept when he's creating, or if he creates and somehow applies Ma without even knowing it. But either way, I think he kind of captures the concept of Ma perfectly. Honestly, I would recommend you kind of checking out his stuff and kind of seeing what I'm talking about with this philosophy, but I'll link it into the description below. Now, when it comes to filmmaking, I know that this is not exclusive to just Japanese filmmakers and creators, but it is something that I noticed that I wanted to learn more about, that I've seen really prevalent into Japanese filmmakers and creators. With filmmaking, you can see Ma used in a plethora of videos. Wide-angle shots, subjects to the rule of thirds, and negative spaces showing spacing. People may not think of it in a way that the philosophy of Ma is being used, but the unconscious attention to this is there. Ma kind of helps us control rhythm. It lets us set the scene and unfold with intention rather than with just noise in the frames. It keeps your storytelling from feeling rushed, kind of lets the viewers absorb what they're kind of seeing on screen. And taking the time to focus on your composition and the use of negative space for you to create a visual that has more intentions with just, normal spacing and static shots. So we can now get into the emotion side of this. So the emotion is not only just created by what's shown, it is created by what's not shown. When you leave space for a pause or stillness, you kind of give the audience room to feel what you're kind of being shown on screen. A quiet scene can say a lot more than a loud one, and a slow movement can hold a lot more weight than a fast action-paced shot. So now we're going to talk how you can apply this to yourself and how you can do it on your own. So in my last video, I spoke about stillness or still frames. And in that video, I talked about how it's important to use still shots to help you focus on, what's on screen and the compositions that you have framed out. I think Ma is almost the pinnacle use of stillness. Now, if you take this idea and apply Ma or negative spaces and use it with intention, you can create negative spaces that support the video. I suggest trying to use a wide angle lens. They kind of give you a wider focal length to work with and helps you create negative space. Now, I want you to think about your location. What location to you seems like it would have aspects of negative space that would be a lot more intentional to use with the philosophy of Ma. Are there windows? Are there minimal looking elements? One thing that I think is probably the easiest to use is the sky. The sky is, one that pretty much is just all negative space, and it's super easy to, frame out shots and have a lot more intention with that. Pair this out with some sound design and music if you want, and you can now create something with the elements of Ma. Now, this is just a concept of filmmaking that I might be looking too deep into, kind of like how an English teacher tells you to read in between the lines of something that an author wrote. But the concept of Ma seems to pair up with the style of filmmaking that I saw in Japan. So, just let me know if this is something you try. But That's the end of this video. Thank you for watching. If you like it, please like, subscribe, and all that blah 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 stuff that I'm reading off of my script. But yeah, I think Ma is super interesting. I think you should probably try this if you'd like. But till then, peace out.